So many people who have never lived out in the world, their entire adult life has been with their nose in a book. And that's great. We need people to intellectualize and go through academia in this way. But nothing can be fully understood by simply reading it in a book. All right, welcome back to the party, everybody. This is Morty, and I am your host, Lunch, aka the Indian Jesus, here to resurrect the second coming of common sense. Let's party. So, guys, we've been talking a lot lately about the man versus the message, whether it is in the red pill or in politics or anywhere else. There's been a discussion looming about, the message versus the man. Does it matter that the message we are pushing is what we believe in? Or does it matter more the character of he who is pushing that message? So we have a video here from Wisecrack that deals with ethics and philosophy and all that stuff to answer exactly that question. So they're not going to necessarily go in the politics route, but that's what I'm here for.
So, not to cosplay as an anxious PhD student procrastinating on their dissertation, but honestly, what's the point of philosophy anyway? Seriously though, why do we care so much about what a bunch of dead people think about a whole host of speculative questions? And in particular, why do we take our ethical cues from a bunch of folks who would get immediately canceled in 2023? Well, the classic answer is that philosophy is about the teaching of the good life, and that by learning from tradition, we can get closer to living the good life ourselves. But that still doesn't really answer the question, who are philosophers to tell us how to live our lives? Especially as many of them are, to be generous, ivory tower nerds who have been in college since they were 18 and have never worked a real job.
Yeah, that's, something that is applicable to the political side of things, that we have so many people who have never lived out in the world. Their entire adult life has been with their nose in a book. And that's great. We need people to intellectualize and go through academia in this way. But there's a practicality to everything. And nothing can be fully understood by simply reading it in a book.
Folks for whom all that really matters is securing the most prestigious job so they can have as much time as possible to write about old books and listen to themselves talk, and in some cases, form weird thruples with current students and ex-partners. And that's before we even get into the great philosophers who are about as wretched a pile of deviants as you could ever hope to meet. We've got Nazis, we've got fans of slavery, we've got murderers, and basically all of them are adulterers to boot. And these guys are supposed to teach ethics to me, a man who's never been a Nazi, a fan of slavery, or a murderer.
And so, you could ask you could put the same thing as like an Andrew Tate and pick a politician, any politician. You put them in that situation, and it's like, okay, you've done this, and this, but you're saying this, that, and that. Where do you draw the line between, okay, you've done, despite what you were saying, you've done too much in your life that I don't trust you, regardless of what you're saying.
And to be clear, in case my wife is watching, an adulterer, because of all this content I gotta make, when would I even have time for that? So what's the deal? Do philosophers need to be ethical themselves to teach us how to be good people?
So that's the overarching question. Do philosophers or do people need to be good people in order to tell us how we should live our lives?
And if so, which philosophers are actually worth taking ethical advice from? Let's get into it in this Wisecrack edition. Can we learn ethics from jerks? If you're unfamiliar with the chronicles of badly behaved philosophers, here's a little buffet of depravity. So we got Kant's lectures on anthropology, which contain a hierarchy of races, arguably inspiring the tradition of scientific racism. Similarly, David Hume claimed that other races were inferior to white people. And though he claimed to be anti-slavery, he helped his patron purchase a plantation. For his part, Aristotle defended slavery as a natural institution and dropped lines like, "A slave is a living possession, and from the hour of their birth, some are marked out for subjection, others for rule." And for a bonus track, the male is by nature superior and the female inferior. In case you're just coming in there, this is not a video on Andrew Tate.
Actually, it is a video on Andrew Tate. Not specifically, but this is exactly the type of question that we want to ask about Andrew Tate, because he is taking the place of those philosophers. And so we can listen to the negative traits about these philosophers, but these are the grandfathers of the types of thought that we take seriously as the right way of thinking, whether it's religious or not. When it comes to morality, these are the men that we look up to dictate how we should live our lives. But they've done all these horrible things, just like a lot of people look up to Andrew Tate, but he might have done some things that you don't really like.
This is on philosophy, so there you go. But if you did come for a video on Andrew Tate, stay, because this will be way more helpful. But wait, there's more. Martin Heidegger was a literal member of the Nazi Party. Yes, that Nazi Party. When Ludwig Wittgenstein was a school teacher, he beat a boy until he was unconscious. Jeremy Bentham was an enthusiastic designer of prisons.
So even if you're not familiar with these guys, understand that in philosophy, these are the tops of the top. These are the books that you read if you are a philosophy major, if you're going into philosophy. These are the people that you're going to be talking about in debates, all of that kind of stuff. These are the people. So let's see what his argument is against all of these terrible character traits, given what they have to say about how we should live.
Panopticon. Ever heard of it? That was him. Peter Singer has argued for the consensual banging of animals.
So
they consent.
If you like, they consent as much as animals can ever consent to anything. Yeah.
Bruh.
Yeah, sure.
And his work has been accused of essentially advocating for the genocide of people with disabilities. He says, as long as you please her, that you can bang a dolphin. Don't do that. Wisecrack says, don't bang animals.
Yeah, I co-sign that. Don't bang animals, please.
These philosophers are often no better in their personal lives. Louis Althusser murdered his wife, after which he was declared mentally unfit to stand trial and committed to a psychiatric hospital. Schopenhauer stalked young women and pushed an old woman down a flight of stairs.
He kind of looks like the dude who would do that.
No word on how he treated middle-aged women, but I'm gonna guess, not great. For his part, Jean-Jacques Rousseau fathered 5 children by a woman he then eviscerated in his autobiography, and he gave all the children away to an orphanage shortly after their births. Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir had sexual relations with their students. I mean, they were French, but still. And
so so first of all, let's ask how many of you actually are familiar with these people, and how many of you are interested in me diving into the teachings of these people? Let me know in the comments below.
Soren Kierkegaard suddenly broke off his engagement to his fiancée, then used the breakup in his writing to make some aesthetic point, which his fiancée was definitely not impressed by. The list goes on. We need a much longer video to shout out all the philosophers who cheated on their partners. If you're a philosopher who cheats on your partner, shout it out in the comments. Use your full name and your academic position. So we've established that many philosophers who are professionally obligated to contemplate how to live a good life are still often badly behaved pieces of shit with some really up ideas.
This also goes to speak to our religious leaders. You know, there's over and over and over and over again. You know, it was big in the 90s when we had the televangelists, and it seemed like every one of those guys had some, closet full of skeletons, whether it was that they were gay, whether it was that they were cheating, whether it was that they were embezzling money from the church, and whatever it was. But they were still people that had these huge followings despite how they behaved because of what they said.
So you might be asking, why should we follow in their wake or even take their ideas seriously?
Yeah.
So to think about that, let's go back to Immanuel Kant and his objectively very bad anthropological hierarchy of races. In his lectures on anthropology, Kant established a lineal root genus race that all others descended from, which was white of brownish color. Oh boy. From there we get, in descending order, noble blonde, Northern Europe from humid cold.
It's getting
copper
bad.
red America from dry cold. And from here, it's where he just very much gets racist. I'm not going to read some of this. So it's on the screen. Check it out.
Oh, read it. It says black Senegambia from humid heat, and olive yellow, which would be Asians and Indians, from dry heat. So I guess that's an olive yellow. You know, I have the yellow warm light on, but yeah, that fits. I don't think that's too bad. You have to remember the time in which these were being said. You know, we can laugh at the dare I say absurdity of what we're listening to because it was so normal at the time. But I'm very interested to see what his conclusion is on do we listen to these people or not? Because he is certainly a hardcore philosopher who definitely does follow those people. So he has to have some rationalization, and I'm curious if it's good enough.
It's not good. It's not good, guys. It's not good. Now, he did argue all of this in the context of saying that humans are all part of one common species. But yeah, it's still racist as fuck. But it's also worth saying that Kant was not only a racist.
Exactly.
He was a lot of things, including one of the most important and influential moral philosophers of all time. He's the guy that came up with the categorical imperative. And he was also someone whose work...
So it says, act only according to that maxim, whereby you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. Not exactly sure what that means out of context, but...
was and is extremely hard to understand. If you want to see this in action, pause the video, go start reading Kant's Critique of Pure Reason, and then come back here and
don't do that.
And let me know how it's going. In a way, then, it would be way easier if Kant was simply a racist, because then we could just dismiss his work wholesale. No more need to talk about the transcendental unity of a perception, or the thing in itself, or the aforementioned categorical imperative. Kant was a racist, but it's still more complicated than that. In fact, regardless of what Kant wrote in his anthropology lectures, in much more central parts of his work, he writes about ideas that are just utterly in contradiction with racism. His entire ethical framework is structured around the idea that we should only treat other people as ends in themselves, never as means to our ends. His categorical imperative is act only under a maxim that would work as a universal law, i.e. one that applies to everyone, just so long as they are human. His ethics must thus apply to all human beings, or it would be nothing. That implies treating people equally, regardless of their culture or the color of their skin.
So you can have thoughts that people are different, but if you understand that the moral imperative is to treat everybody the same, doesn't the message matter more? But again, the question is, at what point do we draw that line and say, hey, you're just a little bit too problematic, a little bit too toxic, and you need to be canceled?
So even by Kant's own moral philosophy, the race hierarchy stuff is bullshit, which is good. But also, if it's in contradiction with his greater system, did he just write that shit because it was a fun way to spend an evening? God, I'm so glad we have streaming television so we don't have to sit at home and write hierarchies of races for fun, because that's what we do if we didn't have Netflix. This contradiction is further borne out in Kant's political philosophy. In his influential essay, Idea for a Universal History with a Cosmopolitan Purpose, Kant discusses the ways in which we might see a peaceful global order as emerging from conflicts between peoples over time. In this sort of proto-Hegelian essay, he argues that conflicts and antagonisms are what lead to human development at both the individual and societal level.
Conflicts are what lead to progress, basically. Okay, interesting.
He writes, the history of mankind can be seen in the large as the realization of nature's secret plan to bring forth a perfectly constituted state as the only condition in which the capacities of mankind can be fully developed, and also bring forth that external relation among states which is perfectly adequate to this end. So rather than some type of racist hellscape, Kant is arguing for the necessity of a universal civic society which will create a common law amongst men.
So if that's what you're fighting for, if in your head you believe that despite the fact that we want people to be treated equally under the law, you think that this race is worse than that race, what do we do, guys? What do we do? Let's take Kant specifically, who was talking about all of this stuff, but he was essentially a racist. Again, everybody at that time thought about race in a I guess similar type of way. Is that okay? Should we not listen to the very, very wise musings of Immanuel Kant because of that?
Now, is there some major Eurocentric bias here? Totally. Kant's ideal global society looks like a sort of confederation of enlightened European-style monarchies. But what Kant writes is precisely not compatible with the idea that anyone might be excluded on grounds of race. Let's get back to it. Yes, Kant was racist in some respects, but his more complex ideas offer some pretty compelling counter-arguments against himself. And despite his personal leanings, anyone actually following his maxims would necessarily need to divest of racism in order to be morally good. And this is also a really good example of one of the most important things a reader of philosophy or any subject for that matter can do, which is to read an author against themselves, holding them up to their own conceptual standard. But we can only appreciate Kant's internal contradictions once we move past the blanket assessment that he was a bad person. When we dig into the details of his work, it seems we can actually learn from him regardless of his problematic opinions.
So that's his Wisecrack's position, is that we can learn from him despite his imperfections. And I think that is a good way to go about things. I do think there is a line that needs to be drawn, and I think maybe it's just a matter of that needs to be case by case. I don't know. So definitely go check out the rest of Wisecrack's video if you're interested in more about specific philosophers. But I thought it was a very interesting question phrased in the concept of philosophy, because it's not about, current people. It's not about politicians or people who are alive and speaking today. It's about people whose ideas have already been enshrined as wisdom, conventional wisdom, and maybe they weren't such great people. So let me know what you guys thought in the comments below. Thank you so much for partying with us. Once again, this is Morty, and I am your host, Lutch, aka the Indian Jesus, here to resurrect the second coming of common sense. Check us out live every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and hey, join the Discord server, guys. That is right. The Discord is free. There's a link in the bio. It is where we are hanging out every single day, and after every live stream, we do an after party. Check it out. Come join us. Until then, guys, thank you so much. We are out of here. Peace.